Hi, it's Nicole. Today I'm going to talk about 4 of the best books I read in the month of March. The first one is A Journal of the Plague Year by Daniel Defoe. This is the most different, interesting and remarkable book I read this year. So the title is A Journal of the Plague Year. So it reads like a journal. Some part more like a personal diary, some part more like news reports, and some other parts reads like editorial essays. And it's about the plague year, which is the 1665 Great Plague of London. And we have a first-person narrator. When the plague first arrived in London, the narrator made the decision to stay in the city and to witness and record the horrors of the days. So he recorded people's first reactions when they heard the plague was coming. A lot of them escaped, moved out of the city altogether with their families and everything they could carry. And a lot of people stayed. And the narrator gave some reasoning why people stayed and his personal reason why he decided to stay. And he also wrote about what were the rules and actions from Lord Mayor of London and the local officials to cope with the situation and to slow the spread of the disease, basically. And then he also recorded how the number of deaths increased each week, week by week, in various parishes as a news report almost. And also things he heard, things he saw in people's houses, in the streets and in the graveyards. There was a great scene of him in the middle of the night, went to the graveyard and saw how the bodies were carried on carts and just thrown in. It was a terrifying image. But he records a lot of those things he saw and heard. And some of those scenes really reminded me of the 10th plague in the book of Exodus, where it says there was loud wailing in Egypt, for there was not a house without someone dead. In some sense, even worse, because usually a whole family, a whole household all died together. It's a remarkable book because of the subject matter, especially as we are at this stage of a pandemic. There are some striking similarities. And it's very interesting for many reasons. For one, that the book is not actually a journal by H.F., who signed his name at the end of the book. I'm not sure if you can see. It's definitely not a memoir of Defoe, since Daniel Defoe was only 5 when the plague happened. And in the end, the introduction said the book is actually part fiction and part non-fiction. I really love that. I want to make a dedicated reading journal video for this book and spend more time talking about it and looking at it. I really love this one. So we will swiftly move on to the next book. The next book is Radical Wordsworth by Jonathan Bate. This is a biography of William Wordsworth. It talks about his life, his person, as well as his poems. And William Wordsworth, in my mind, is almost completely the same thing as his poems. When you say William Wordsworth, I have text in my head, text on pieces of paper. He's almost just two-dimensional, but that can't be right, and it's not right. So I wanted to know more about his person and his life so I can understand his works better. That's how I chose to read this biography. The book does the job really well. It talks about the major events in his life as well as the key figures. For example, his childhood and how his parents died when he was very young, and the rest of his family, his brothers and sister. And Coleridge was a key figure. He appeared quite a lot. And the Hutchinson sisters, and how William Wordsworth lived with 3 women in this house for a period of his life. And there was also a French woman and a daughter. He also explains his poems, how they were written, in what circumstances, and in response to what kind of personal or political events that they were written, like the death of a family member or the French Revolution, and how his poems were received at the time. I loved the stories more, the life events more, and the theories of the poems a bit less. When you start to talk about poems, when you start to analyze poems, it gets academic really quick. But knowing the author, Jonathan Bate, I read his English literature, a very short introduction, if you remember this one. Knowing how academic this is, the biography is really not too bad. I really love hearing how all the names were connected and how they interacted with each other in history. For example, Coleridge was extremely jealous of Wordsworth living with these 3 women who all surrounded him and worshipped him daily. And William Hazlitt, caused a scandal in a local pub and had to run to William Wordsworth's house and hid for a night from the mob. And Charles Lamb is a fascinating figure. I heard about him from a podcast first, and then I read about him in Guernsey Literary and Potato Peel Pie Society. He talked a lot about him, and in this book as well. If you know any books I should read to know more about Charles Lamb, or anything he's written, anything he wrote, to know more about him, please leave me a message. I'm really interested in Charles Lamb. To conclude, I would have loved this book even more if the poetry analysis was a bit more accessible. But overall, it's a great biography. I now know William Wordsworth as a person rather than just a name. He's now 3D with flesh and blood. The next book is Evelina by Frances Burney. Frances Burney was Jane Austen's favourite author, and Evelina was Frances Burney's first novel. It's about a young woman going into society, about all the mistakes she made and all the people she met and had to deal with, and at the end to find happiness. Because Evelina and all of Jane Austen's novels come under the same category, which is Regency era social commentary plus husband hunting, you can actually compare them and contrast them. And it's very interesting to see because there are many similarities. For example, Evelina and Lizzie Bennet, or if you compare Evelina and Fanny Price, there are many similarities between them. But there are also a lot of differences. One thing is that it's quite obvious after you read it. Jane Austen is much more superior. I guess there's a reason Jane Austen is on the 10-pound note and Frances Burney is not. But it does give a historical context. What did Jane Austen read? What did she like? What was popular at her time? And was she inspired? I think she was inspired, and for my reason for saying so, please watch a previous video I made all about Evelina, and I compared her with Jane Austen's novels in a bit more detail and why I think Jane Austen was inspired, but in what ways Jane Austen is definitely a better author and her stories are better stories. I'll put the link in the description box if you'd like to have a watch. So the last one is Macbeth by William Shakespeare. I've been slowly catching up with Shakespeare. So far I read Two Gentlemen of Verona, As You Like It, Hamlet, and The Tempest. So Macbeth is the most fast-paced and action-packed, I'd say. There are 7 scenes in Act 1 and 9 scenes in Act 5. There are usually just 5 scenes in each act in the previous ones I read, so this is quite unique. And it's called Shakespeare's Scottish play, so it happened in Scotland. And I listened to BBC Radio Shakespeare and I really enjoyed the Scottish accent. And again, I made a reading journal video just last week all about Macbeth. Mostly I talked about the witches and their prophecies and my favourite lines in the play. So if you are interested, please follow the link and give it a watch. And I think it's high time I read a biography of William Shakespeare of some sorts. If you have any recommendations, if you read any that is good or bad, please let me know in the comment. I would love to find a good one to read. I think Jonathan Bate, the same author of English Literature and the Radical Wordsworth biography, he wrote a biography of William Shakespeare as well. I'm tempted to read it just because I know the author already, but I am slightly worried it's going to be academic as well, again. So let me know what you think. It's already April. Reading-wise, I've started The Mill on the Floss by George Eliot and have been enjoying it so far. I also started reading The Watsons by Jane Austen. It It's one of Jane Austen's unpublished novels, and I will report. For Easter weekend, I plan to meet up with some friends in London. We really wanted to go to Harry Potter studio, but it was all booked up, probably from 2 years ago, so we couldn't go. And I wanted to go to Globe Theatre and watch a Shakespeare play as well, but curiously, over Easter, there was no performance, there was no play. It was, I don't know why. There's only guided tours and family events, but no full plays. So we can't do that either. So if you have any recommendation what to do in London, please let me know. We're still thinking. That's all for today. Thank you for watching. I will see you in my next one.